everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Buzz. I'm Eric Hansen, and on behalf of all of us here at OTT.X, we are delighted to welcome you to this episode of OTT.X Videocast The Buzz, where we offer up our online stage to a few streaming industry insiders to drop their version of the truth on us about what's going on, what it means, and what we should do about it in the tumultuous world of OTT streaming. Before we turn things over to this episode's crew of Buzzketeers, I want to make sure to mention that you can find and subscribe to all episodes of The Buzz via podcast on Spotify. Just search for OTT.X and be sure to follow us so you'll be notified about future episodes as well. We're going to drop the Spotify link into the podcast so that you can click on it and jump over there easily. There's always a lot going on in the OTT.X sphere, but this month in particular, our flagship conference, the OTT.X X-Fronts, is just 2 weeks away, May 21 and 22. The X-Fronts is where everyone, and especially all the cool kids from the streaming ecosystem, gather to connect, learn, collaborate, and do business. So, of course, you'll want to be there too. So I want to invite everybody, head out to the X-Front sites at OTTX.org, whack X-Fronts to learn more and do register today. All right, without further ado, presiding over today's group of OTT Ruckus Raisers, we're excited to welcome our moderator, a longtime friend and partner of OTT.X, TK Arnold, publisher and editorial director at Media Play News, and panelists, Bryan Crocker, Chief Operating Officer at Multicom Entertainment, Fred Godfrey, co-founder and Chief Executive Officer of Origin, Yolanda Macias, Chief Content Officer at Cineverse, and Steve Saltman, Head of Domestic Sales at Electric Entertainment. Welcome, everybody.
Good morning.
Got a great crew, as always. Y'all ready to take us down the rabbit hole of OTT streaming?
Yes, before we start, Eric, remind me to send you a new profile photo. I look like an insurance salesman. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but...
I think you look fabulous.
Thank you, Eric.
As do all of you. All right. And yes, this is a safe place for guitars and dogs. Thank you, Bryan. So your puppy's back there lending moral support, if nothing else. All right. Well, have fun. We'll talk to you in a while.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. Why don't we start, instead of me reintroducing you, if everybody can just begin and tell us briefly what you do and what your company does before we dive into our Buzz discussion. Why don't we start with Steve, who's just to my right here?
Oh, okay. I head up distribution for Electric Entertainment. We're the parent company of Fast Channel AVOD programming services, Electric Now and Electric Now in Espanol. Company was founded by Dean Devlin, a wonderfully created A-level producer who, to his credit, has created and produced the likes of the Stargate franchise, Independence Day movies, some really big films, and some big series. We're primarily a production company, and we got into distribution, I guess, about 5-6 years ago, and we launched our first fast channel over 5 years ago now. So we've been in pretty early, and it's been a fun ride. And so, as I said, I work with the parent company, and Electric Now in Espanol. All aspects of that fall under me.
Okay, Fred.
Yes, Fred, described as CEO, but more probably the janitor-in-chief over here at Origin. We're creative technology, and we're hired by brands and their media and or creative agencies to help sort of reshape how they see their creatives looking on television, only on streaming, of course. We like to leverage all of the good stuff that comes with streaming that traditional TV can't, and try and give these clients of ours the ability to be as dynamic and as agile in their creative output as they have been getting used to on other screens over the last 5-10 years. My background is pretty straightforward. I used to sell tea. That got me into advertising, and now I live here in New York. So don't be fooled by the Bronx accent.
I got that. The British accent, T. I see the connection. I see the connection.
It's a rite of passage.
Yolanda, tell us who you
Hi.
are.
Good morning. I'm Yolanda Macias, the Chief Content Officer for Cineverse. We're an entertainment and technology company. My team and I source movies and TV series from all over the world and bring it into Cineverse for distribution through third-party distribution, as well as our own streaming services, which we have over 25 of those. We're also a technology company, so we also have Matchpoint, which is our end-to-end streaming solution. So it's all powered by Matchpoint, both our streaming services and to third-party distribution. We have over 70,000 pieces of content, so we're very busy monetizing that and bringing in more content.
All right, and last but certainly not least, Bryan Crocker.
Thanks, TK. Yeah, so I'm the COO at Multicom Entertainment Group. We're a global independent film and television acquisition distribution company. The thing that sort of makes us a little unique is we specialize in buying catalogs of titles that need to be restored. So we do full end-to-end physical media restoration into digital, 4K, whatever format you need, but we distribute to every SVOD, AVOD, TVOD, EST platform, broadcasters, every language you can imagine, all over the world. So we've got a couple thousand titles and growing.
Okay, and we cannot skip introducing the dog. Tell us about him.
So the guy behind me, that's Henry. He just turned a year old. He's a rescue, kind of a mutt, but he's mostly terrier. And then there's two more floating around. There's a 13-year-old Maltipoo sleeping below my desk, and a 7-month-old Bichon poodle who's in the living room watching the pool guy right now. So
they love the pool guys, don't they?
Yeah.
All right, well, let's dive right into it. How many of you went to the recent NAB show in Las Vegas? Okay, I was there and doing the party circuit, and then getting up bright and early for the streaming summit. And I was really kind of impressed with Dan Rayburn. Dan Rayburn is this analyst who really doesn't like hype. And in his half-hour welcome address, he really had some strong things to say about the streaming world. And he goes, there's a lot of inaccurate information floating around. You know, every week we get a new story about viewership and all these incredible numbers. He goes, the real question is, where are you making money? So I think you've all had a chance to read the article. What are your thoughts? Was he being too harsh, or did he give us a badly needed reality check?
Yeah, so I'll jump in on this one, TK, to start off. But yeah, I think there's kind of three things Dan pointed at in his opening address that I agree with fundamentally. And one is the kind of a willingness and readiness for people to sort of parrot out stats that come from who knows where, right? And I think the nice thing about OTT.X and the sort of industry analysts and journalists like yourself and David and Colin and Laura that we have here is, I don't see you guys doing that, but there are people that you can say, oh, this is what the churn rate is on these platforms. These are the subscriber numbers for Hulu and Tubi and all these places. And then the question is, where are these numbers coming from? And a lot of times they're wild estimates from random analyst companies that you've never heard of, and no one's fact checking them. And all of a sudden everybody's just saying, oh, it's amazing what, you're seeing this growth or this low churn on this platform. So that's the first issue. But the second issue is because these platforms don't disclose most of these numbers, right? And that's kind of a problem if you're trying to be a content partner and choose what platforms you want to work with, because, our livelihoods and most of the people on this panel livelihoods depend on these platforms sort of, honestly reporting against our content and paying us and giving us useful metrics so we can know what content works and doesn't. And it runs the gamut. You've got all kinds of analytics from places like Amazon or Google. If you have YouTube channels, they have great analytics. You kind of have to trust that the numbers they're giving you are real. But then we get reports from other companies, so I won't necessarily name on this, channel, and they're like, here's your money. We can't tell you what your view hours are, who was watching, how many ads were served, what the CPM rates were. And you just kind of have to trust that that's legit. And even if you have an audit clause, I mean, no one's doing that. That's a futile effort. So that's the second piece. And then the third piece that's, really, I think, important for this panel and this audience is he talked a lot about fast, right? And who's making money, who's being successful. And, the platforms themselves very rarely break out what their revenue and profit is on their fast part of whether it's, they have a VOD platform, an SVOD platform, an EPG with fast channels. Very hard to know what, where their revenue is coming from. And, I think we'll probably talk more about it, but he mentioned Vizio's one that does break it out in their earnings. Tubi just came out with their sort of report via Fox, and they talked about how 90% of their revenue comes from VOD versus their, their linear channels. So Dan's right about all of this. And I think, we have a lot of work to do to sort of push these platforms to give at least the content providers better data, if not the rest of the industry, so we can kind of see, what's what.
I agree with Bryan. Consistent data, universal metrics that we can all look at, because again, I think we're all seeing these different platforms provide different bits of information, kind of apples and oranges, the whole thing. And so once we get to that universally accepted metrics that are provided to everyone, I think the whole world will expand for big and small alike. I mean, I always go back to Nielsen, which I think we can all agree was never really a good measurement service back in the day. But the key was it was universally accepted, whether it's from advertiser to local stations, networks, et cetera. We have to get back to a universal metric that's apples to apples with all the platforms, and that works for everyone in the overall ecosystem from my perspective.
What's interesting is one of Dan Rayburn's critiques was that even Nielsen won't define what a viewer is. What is a viewer? Somebody who watches a whole movie, half a movie, one episode in a series, or 2 minutes? So we don't know what viewers are. And I think that when we start hearing all these big numbers from the major streamers, it makes smaller companies reticent to reveal their own viewership numbers. I had one small streaming operation tell me that they're doing really well with 200,000 subscribers, but they don't want to go public with that because they feel dwarfed by Amazon and Netflix.
Yeah, but standardization of data and complete data is the only way to unlock the growth of the streaming channels. And basically it's slowing down fast. But the other area that Dan also, and I think he just focused on areas of improvement that people just don't want to talk about because everyone wants to, hype things. But the other area was about focus, and he demanded focus. And everybody that is within the streaming space needs to understand their role and what are they contributing, who is their audience. And with those questions answered, everyone will be able to find their place. For example, Cineverse, we leaned into technology. So while we have a lot of content, we use that as our case study to prove out the technology that we're developing, building, and selling. So I think that's another area that Dan narrated in his remarks.
Yeah, that's a good.
And TK, just from my side, from the buying side, right? Sort of putting the Origin sort of agency hat on to give it a slightly different angle, but actually supports, I think, what everyone's discussed so far. As a buyer, that lack of information and transparency, and to your point, Yolanda, uniformity of information across the spectrum makes our job incredibly difficult. We're here to give people money. But that's not our priority. Our priority is to do right by our clients. And there are a lot of benchmarks that we are expected to be set to, that we ask. And that requires us knowing very clearly where we're putting our clients' investments and getting accurate information from the campaigns that are being served, and having it provided us in a way that is centralized, that we can centralize and that we can normalize and better understand. But we don't have that. It's the thing that we've all talked about, and we all love to talk about solving, but fundamentally, I just don't think we can. I think we're too far gone. But the walled fortresses within the walled fortresses, within the walled gardens, are so high. And fundamentally, from my seat, I see that as simply being a method of self-preservation. It is such a dangerous landscape out there, with multi-billion-dollar, trillion-dollar market cap companies playing in the same swimming pool as a $50,000 startup. And it shouldn't be this way, but it is, because by having this lack of transparency to what we started this discussion about, it's very, very easy to hide certain truths.
Well, will things ever get better? I mean, just recently, Netflix even said that they would take a step back and would no longer report subscriber numbers.
Yeah, that's my feedback on that. There was a lot that I think we deserve to hear from Netflix in order to justify the rate that they ask folks like us to pay, to run our clients' campaigns. And I'm sorry, and I've got to any of my friends at Netflix who are here, I'm sorry, I don't care. If you're going to ask for that much money, you can't just say, but we're Netflix. Okay, that doesn't work. Sorry.
Well, my take on this is money always drives the ecosystem. So if money's coming from advertisers, it's on advertisers who are going to drive this universally or standardized a bit of data that will ultimately justify the spend, et cetera, will ultimately grow the big and small alike.
Well, yes, you're right. So like in this argument, let's say exactly right. It's on me to make, us to be the ones that are pushing to make this situation better. Yeah. Absolutely. No, I don't disagree with you. But for us to do that also requires the channel owner or the media owner telling the platforms and services where their content is running, you may be running it, but it's still ours. Right. And I think where there's a really big problematic area, which came about, I've been involved in connected TV since before it really, since the day before it properly existed, back in my scripts and Newsy days, where we led, my current business partner and former boss and I led Newsy's pivot to connected TV at the end of 2015. Right. The first thing that we started seeing were very disparate, rates and business models and agreements, whether you're going to do an inventory split or a rev share. And that immediately makes everything messy, because the services you're running on, you've got to have a deal with. But the platforms that they're running on, they've also got to have a deal with. And one of the biggest problems fundamentally, and I've mentioned this before with OTT.X, is there are 10 people trying to get 8 slices of pie, of financial pie. And that I think is the problem, and that's where I think we need to start to solve this, because that's where it literally starts branching off the second that your content exists.
One other thing that Dan brought up was about FAST, and I think the key points about what he said is there's way too much hype floating around FAST as the latest shiny new toy in the streaming business. And the reality is the money is not that big and it's not that immediate. It's going to take a while for the money to come in. Are you finding that true? I mean, do you think FAST right now is overhyped, or are we just in the early stages?
I'm sorry, I'll say, but then I'll hand over because I've already spoken way too much. It's not a hype. It's here to stay. There's no question about that. And one of the reasons why I would posit that point is, put yourself in the position of actually being a consumer, something that we're very good at forgetting in this industry to do, right? At the end of the day, go home, switch on your telly, get a gin and tonic and watch TV. And the FAST experience is actually is a relatable experience. And it doesn't come with all the jokes and all the memes of spending half an hour flicking through series, watching trailers before you realize it's time for bed. FAST is definitely here to stay. It's going to get better. Right now, I think most EPGs have far too many channels. And the TV Plus this world are carving channels out, and others will do so as well. But I think it's here to stay because it's a good experience for the viewer, but also it's critical. I think we'll be chatting about this later. It's a critical point of entry and discovery for viewers as well.
Yeah, it's here to stay, but it's going to go through some rough patches. And I think you're already seeing people talk about, don't expect the kind of growth that we've been talking about previously in the future. And that's because everyone's anticipating that things need to be fixed, data being one of them, but also a better experience to the end user. We should all be looking, again, I go back to the audience. Who's your audience? Who are you trying to reach? How are you reaching them and providing them an experience that is different from the 2,000 other channels that are on? on the platforms. The connected TVs are doing a good job in demanding quality and kicking people off if you're not really refreshing and bringing something that's unique to their audience.
Yeah.
So we'll continue to see that.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree totally with what both Yolanda and Fred have said, and I think that it's definitely here to stay. There's going to be a whole bunch of revolutions on how it works, but I think the biggest issue now is it's not hype, it's saturation, right? Everybody has fast channels, like Fred said. There's too many channels on each EPG, and as content providers, like many of us are, I think one of the challenges and the growing pains we'll go through is, you're going to get some consolidation, and you're going to get some companies that turn into more channel operators versus just trying to do everything yourselves, right? If you're Samsung and you're trying to fill out your EPG, you've got classic movie channel you can get from us or Cineverse or Electric or 10 other companies. And what the customer ultimately wants at the end of the day is probably one or two classic movie channels with content from all of those people that is the best of the best, or what they're looking for that's maybe more niche, that drills down a little further. And the issue right now is everyone's trying to sort of carve out their own part of the fast ecosystem and own their own channel and be successful. And eventually that'll work itself out where it becomes, again, we're passing content back and forth. And as long as the reporting piece we're talking about is accurate and fair and all that, then I think everyone's going to be happy to not have to power their own Westerns channel and be able to supply Westerns content to the couple folks that are doing it well, and vice versa. But that'll take a few more years to work out, but it certainly is and will be replacing traditional linear television. There's just no question.
But they're expensive channels. The channels are expensive to run, right, guys? I mean, most of you here do it. Like, it's actually, there's a pretty significant cost attached just to keeping it operating, let alone keeping it fresh, right?
Well, sure, but where we are, and I think we've all basically saying the same thing. We're still early, we're still maturing, and I'll just take it from a historical perspective, in that we saw this when all of a sudden cable started popping. All new channels starting to come out. It's all going to shake out. It needs to consolidate. And that gets back to what Bryan was talking about in, being universal and open, fully disclosed, et cetera. That's what's gonna grow it. And we do have to consolidate. You can't at one point have 18 different Western channels. But that's where we are. We're right at that beginning. We're born, we're toddlers, and we're going forward.
Yeah, and there's been a big gold rush. I mean, 2019, 2020 was a gold rush, I think, right? Like, a lot of people realized that having a standalone app, is not going to cut it, right? Like, the discovery problem will never be solved, and you really do need to know how to make money from it. But if you can create a lovely channel and give it to Takashi, for example, and have him carry it, I mean, then all your problems are solved. For a short while, I think that was the case. And what folks like Cineverse, I think, have done, which, I know you guys so well, I think you're a really great business, is you staked your place early on. And Yolanda, I think you were saying something similar. Like, you put your channels there and you show goodwill to the OEMs or to whoever's managing these EPGs. And now you're there and you're there to stay. And that's an advantage that no new entrant will have. But also, just to add another bit from the agency side, like, I know for a fact that there's a huge amount more supply than there is demand. And again, that's another thing that people choose not to disclose, because how is that going to affect their rates? But the problem is that fundamentally, like, a lot of advertising is still being held back from connected TV, despite in many instances being a smarter place for it. If I was to completely pluck numbers out of the sky, I would say we have 10% of the brands that we need currently operating on connected TV to meet today's viewership, which is going to carry on growing as traditional continues to decrease. So we're in a disproportionate rate of growth on both sides.
Let me throw this out. How many of you regularly watch one or more fast channels? And if so, what are they?
I do it every day. I love it. Every evening I'll watch the channel on Pluto or Tubi, and I'll flick between their on-demand offering and their linear offering, and I think that that's really smart. But that's typically where I'll find one of my channels to have. But it is often passive viewing, which as a media buyer is something that we actually try to avoid, which again makes the breadth of the channels available actually really important to us. Because the more concise and the more specialized a channel becomes, the more you can understand its audience, and the more you can look at completely external data sets, and you can say that people who are into anime are just much more attentive, and they stick around, and actually you should advertise to them at 2 a.m. because they will be up, eating a pot noodle, smoking a spliff, but loving the ads, right? Like this is how we can now find our audiences, and that's great for us as buyers.
Steve, how about you? Do you watch any FAST channel?
I do actually, and I'll give a shout out to Bryan. I enjoy the archive. I find some unusual
Bob Ross
classic TV that I can't find anywhere else. Certainly, I'm checking in on our FAST channels constantly. There are a few others that I personally enjoyed, and again, talking to the personal connectivity that we all could potentially bring to the table. I love to travel, and that's part of the reason I got out of being an attorney and moved into sales, because I get to travel and meet people around the world, and that's what I enjoy. So I look at Go Traveler, I look at a few other channels that obviously suit my needs.
Yeah, Yolanda?
No, I was just somebody already said Bob Ross, but that's one of our channels, and ambient content tends to do really well during the day. I'll leave that going on as I'm doing work. I think it also, at the end of the day, the connected TVs are, so essential. And I think you were going to talk about that, but in this case, it's essential for that viewing experience. And then I'll tune into Tubi and do some discoverability of what's, just because I'm curious about what's new in the FAST world. But yeah, ambient during the day, and then a connected TV experience is essential.
Yeah, and Bryan.
Yeah, I mean, thanks to Steve for the archive shout out. Our OTT.X favorite, Jesse Barris, does a lot of hard work programming that channel, and that's probably the one that I watch the most, because I can't watch all of our content coming in because we have so much, and I tend to leave it on just so I can actually get a sense of some of the new things that we're programming. But then, like Yolanda, normally during the day, if I'm not doing some type of specific research of just seeing what's out there, I'll have a concert channel playing, so it sort of fills that music background, plus gives me some sort of fast exposure. I get to see what ads are playing, so that's sort of my passive watching is the various music focused concert kind of channels.
Yeah, okay. Well, again, what we're doing today is we're looking at some recent news stories and kind of discussing them and thinking about what they mean and what they mean for us. And one news story, it's actually a series of news stories, is the whole turmoil surrounding Paramount. Every week it seems they have a new suitor, then a deal is on the verge of being signed, and then it expires and there's no deal signed, and then they move on to something else. But I think the bigger question here with Paramount is, were they right in launching a streaming service of their own, or should they have remained an arms dealer like Sony is? In other words, where they don't have any mainstream streaming service of their own, but they farm out their content to all the other streamers. What are your thoughts on Paramount Plus and the whole turmoil going on at that company? And who wants to start with this one?
I'll go with that.
Great.
It's kind of an interesting point in time, because here we are talking about Paramount, its potential sale. They've been talking, as I think we all know, to Peacock about merging services and seeing how that goes. Historically speaking, there was early on, we're talking about 2005 or so, there was a service called Cinema Now, and that turned out that was initially a JV between Blockbuster and Lionsgate, and ultimately moved into, I think they changed it into Movies.com, and all the studios came in on that as partners. First off, this Peacock Paramount merger sounds wonderful, and it does need to consolidate in some way, but ultimately you need Switzerland. The argument and the problems that pulled apart that early venture, Movies.com, is all the studios wanted their properties to be highlighted. So, I think there were 4 or 5 different entities at the time, all arguing for the perfect shelf space. And so it fell apart accordingly. So I don't know about this Peacock Paramount merger. On the other side, should Paramount have jumped in? I say yes. And I'm not trying to turn this into, say, a hindsight's a 2020 proposition here. But I think you have to. When you have new technology, you go for it. And that's the same, I think, of most industries. If you look at it, broadcast led to a better opportunity of viewing through basic cable and satellite because the viewers, it was a better quality screen, hence a better experience for the viewer and ultimately more money for everyone. And so here we are now talking about streaming. And the answer is yes, it's better, it's cheaper, it can be more refined. And should they have jumped in? Yes, it's really about how they jumped in, when they jumped in, et cetera. And, that's my thought on it.
I mean, here's something that should scare pretty much everybody, though, about this particular topic, which I think is easy to overlook, right? But it speaks to something that broadly we do talk about. If Paramount can't cut it, because that is how vitriolic and competitive the landscape is, then what does that say about absolutely everybody else, right? I made a prediction 3 years ago that was way off, because I think we're still 3 years out, that, there were going to be 6 players entirely in the streaming market, in connected TV, specifically in the living room, and no one else. And everyone will have to live underneath one of those banners, right? And obviously, I think, and again, I kind of agree with Steve. I think Paramount was right to try, but obviously got part of the formula wrong, as well as a lot of the internal machinations wrong. But also look at what Comcast does disclose about how much it has to pay to keep Peacock running. It's obscene. And this is a bigger problem. I think this is opening a far larger Pandora's box, that we're not seeing because we're being so blinded by, is it going to be Sony? Is it going to be Byron? Is it going to be, XYZ, right? Who buys Paramount? I think there's a bigger issue that's being exposed here.
Yeah, totally. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Yolanda.
Go ahead, Yolanda.
Yeah, okay. I totally agree that Paramount is an example of a bigger issue. And it's just I've already forgot my thought. We got interrupted. It's a challenge. It's challenging for any streaming service to come into a marketplace, a content creator or a broadcaster that is making that transition as a general entertainment channel without a brand that is known to the end user. So I always go back again to the end user, the viewer, the audience. Do they know you? And to do that, it doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means it's very expensive. So I think that is difficult. In addition, if you're a public company, you have Wall Street pressures of making sure that you're showing top growth and at the same time profitability. Yeah. And I think Dan actually said this about the balance sheet focus. And that is true, that there are unrealistic expectations of an early adoptive technology and new entrants and new consumer behavior, with the expectation that you're going to be showing high growth and good margins and profitability.
No, you're really right, Yolanda. These bigger companies, it's hard for them to jump quickly into new tech. But yet, ultimately, certainly in this case, Paramount had to. I would argue in 2 ways. First off, typically bigger companies, when something pops, they buy into success, as opposed to creating themselves. Yeah. Our industry is moving too quickly. And I would argue that Paramount and the other big boys jumped in too late and allowed others to define the space. And now they're playing catch up. I was at Blockbuster. You'll love this, kind of a hypocritical thought. I was head of distribution for TV and digital at the time, and they fought me long and hard. And Netflix kept knocking on the door saying, you know, you should buy us, you should buy us. And they kept saying, go pound sand. And that led to where it is. So, you know, that push and tug of big companies, publicly reported, you know, not willing to take certain types of chances, and then they're in a position of trying to catch up, and have others define the space. And you know, that's what it is. I mean, I truly would argue that the Paramounts of the world needed to get in earlier, take their existing brands and figure out a better way to transition them into what's going on today, no less what's going to go on in the future.
Yeah, I mean, ESPN started playing very, very early. And like, to speak from a first person perspective, you know, when we pivoted Newsy, right, the week before we did that, out of 10 people or 100 people that I asked, like, are you familiar with Newsy? 9 out of 10 would have said no. But give it a year or two after we moved into connected TV, everybody knew Newsy. Because ironically, yes, we were, you know, Papa Scripts was this far bigger, you know, beast sitting behind this very cute little millennial news brand, you know, but honestly, we made that move faster than NBC, faster than anybody else on the news side. And we were the predominant news channel, like we were it. And that worked for Newsy for a very long time, until it didn't. Until it got too expensive, too competitive, and too easy for people to find other stuff, or, you know, however you want to put it. But yes, I mean, Paramount was late. But also, you know, one of the things I think that we've all wanted in streaming is to see a democratization of the TV, right? No longer this old-fashioned thing that the networks used to, you know, hold everyone hostage by, with Nielsen being the only source of all truth, etc. Right? This was a chance for anybody to build a channel and be in the media business, and I think it still has that allure. The problem is that now, like, you know, that allure ends for most in a pit full of spikes and snakes and spiders.
Yeah, just to wrap, you know, just to jump in, I think, you know, echoing what Steve said, it was inevitable, right? If you're a major studio and a major broadcast channel operator, I think it was, you know, guaranteed you were going to try building an OTT streaming service. And like everyone's mentioned, they were a little bit too late. But at the end of the day, you look at sort of the money that's being offered or purportedly offered against what the sort of market cap of Paramount is. Maybe it turns out to be a really good decision at the end of the day. But, you know, the reason why I think Sony has been successful as a arms dealer for content is because they're not so tied into having a major broadcast network that they have to support, so they can just focus on making content. And if they had a CBS-like channel, I think they would have been in the streaming game, you know, much more heavily than they have been as their own operator. So, you know, time will tell, but consolidation is going to happen. There's just not enough room. Like there wasn't room for, you know, 8 major studios. There's not room for 8 giant SVOD platforms with 300 million subscribers charging $30 a month. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, it starts to add up to real money. Yeah. Sony, though, in addition, they were in early. They had Crackle, and they offloaded that, which I always thought was a curious decision.
You're right. Crackle was at one point, I mean, like, was where you went to watch a lot of your free content.
Yeah, they were at the early.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, our next story is the latest chapter in the streaming industry's latest enchantment, live sports streaming. And you've got we just had a big cover story about this in our April issue. You know, with the pretty much the forecast that the big media companies are looking to live sports streaming to make up for the continued decline in pay TV. And the question is, you know, will they be able to recoup enough money before the pay TV system completely collapses and the revenue stream ends over there? And even in live sports, you know, you've got different perspectives. Some streamers want to get leagues and they want to be the regular home. others like Netflix want to have events. They don't want to have a regular season of baseball or football. They want to have a live boxing match, live tennis tournament. What are your thoughts on the whole live sports streaming phenomenon?
I mean, I'll jump in real quick. I'll say that, I think what Netflix is doing for their position is very smart, right? They're focusing on the live experiential events that are outside of spending billions of dollars to license a major American sports network or Premier League soccer or Formula One racing, whatever it is. Those are massively expensive. And I think ultimately all those leagues are going to find it's better off becoming like a self-serve provider, the way that MLB learned years ago. Most people will pay, if it's a reasonable amount, for a NFL Sunday ticket if you can get it directly from the NFL or an NBA League Pass or whatever it is. And when you have to pay the subsidy, you have to pay to the league to get billions of dollars into their pockets just to get the rights. And then you've got to get subscription fees and not everybody's watching it. Becomes really difficult. So I think Netflix is sort of dipping their toes into live events by doing, we're in the middle of Netflix is a joke week. They're doing live streaming events right now around all that stuff. So they've created a successful live event concert experience where they're probably making a good amount of money selling tickets, and they're building content for their platform at the same time, which I think is brilliant. So, I think that's the right way to go for them. I think if you're Amazon or Apple, paying for Premier League or MLS or NFL rights is a temporary solution. It's to try to, grab a bunch of subscribers you wouldn't otherwise have. And if they can figure out the economics, maybe they do renewals. But ultimately, I think, the NFL, NBA, Premier League soccer are going to have their own subscription services that are way more successful and valuable for those leagues than licensing it to a broadcaster or a streaming platform.
I mean, live sports is so critical to viewership. I mean, I was at DirecTV when we did the Sunday NFL ticket, went from, a few million subscribers and just put them on a trajectory of, over 40 million households. But it's expensive, to your point, Bryan. The major leagues, they expect a certain amount of money or they're going to do it themselves. So that it's definitely a good route for Netflix to call signature events. I mean, I tuned in to the Tom Brady roast. That's smart, and that's not necessarily sports, but sports related, and it was live streaming. It just is powerful to bring in appointment viewing, to bring in viewers all at one time on multiple levels. So I think it's a good move.
Well, it's Steve, I know you've probably got a far more, useful point than this one, but
no, maybe not.
It's a clever way, right? Like, I mean, how long has Netflix been in the business, and how many times has it changed its methods to acquire new subscribers or audiences? This is a new one, right? This is going to appeal to a different kind of person. Maybe it'll actually appeal to older audiences just as much as younger audiences, because they're more used to, having the sort of, I mean, whenever I go back to London, which is, I'll admit, not enough, but I do see Mum. And when I go and see Mum, she has her, her television guide right on the coffee table. And she likes, like what you just described, Yolanda, as appointment viewing. People like that. And that's probably not a good reason or thing that they thought of, but nevertheless, like things like the Tom Brady roast, I mean, they promoted the hell out of them. And I bet they saw some good growth in it. If they were able to monetize it or secure sponsors as well, to deal with the ad-supported side of Netflix, or to bolster that, which I think is still a fairly shady, sort of like grayed out area for them, I think, will probably do them a lot of good.
I think we all agree on this, and from everyone's perspective, what Netflix is doing is appropriate for Netflix. Amazon, et cetera, looking at leagues is probably more appropriate for them. At the end of the day, this business really hasn't changed. What we're talking about in streaming is it's a new, more efficient delivery system.
Yeah,
it's about getting people in the tent, and whether they come in for an event and hopefully they stick around and look around and go from there, or if you have something that's ongoing that keeps them coming back into the tent, that's what you're looking for. I mean, I got gray hair, TK, just like you do. And I can say that.
What do you mean?
No, I probably have more, and I'm losing it. You have a full head of hair.
I'm
But
blonde.
no,
I'm
but,
blonde.
but the point is, back in the day, Fox Broadcasting, when they launched Fox, they were struggling. They were really dying on the vine. What made it for them was when they were able, frankly, to take NFL away from CBS, and then they were all of a sudden real. That's exactly what's being repeated today. And so ultimately it boils down to getting people's consuming habits to change and pushing them into a new venue, a new opportunity, aka people in the tent. So Showtime and HBO did it with big events, be it boxing, concerts, etc. Probably appropriate for Netflix as a subscription, a pay service. If you're out there more advertiser supported and free, having, whether it's football or basketball or whatever, having them bring people into the tent on a more consistent basis, probably appropriate there. And that's regardless of whether these various leagues start up their own services, which ultimately they will.
So where does the joint venture fit in between Warner, Disney, and Fox?
Well, that's about consolidating their position more than anything else and trying to keep where they can. But I'd say separately, Warner's got to figure that out. They're going to lose NBA, and that's going to be a real problem for that company.
Yeah, it's a hedge, right? You're splitting some of this massive cost. You're hedging. If it doesn't work, you're not losing the entirety of it, but it's going to be complicated. I really do think that eventually, long term, the major sports leagues become much more independent of the networks, and I think the networks become less interested in paying the price tag that these leagues want. And I think it's going to ultimately work out better for everybody that way, especially consumers, because you'll get, hopefully the sort of lowest price that you're willing to pay for a sports league subscription, and all the sort of other studios and broadcasters and SVOD platforms that have been relying on it will have to focus on their own new experiential live events to get people to tune in, and other types of content. And I think it'll ultimately work out, better off.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's move on to our fourth news story, which is another kind of I don't know what to call it, a trend. It's more of a development that we're hearing more and more about, the connected TV, which is kind of something that grew up simultaneous to FAST, but it's definitely its own distinct entity. And we've definitely got three leaders in that field. We've got Samsung, Vizio, and LG. Most recently, somebody described connected TV as kind of the consumer electronics industry's answer to the FAST channels phenomenon. Where do you see the connected TV fitting in? Will other TV manufacturers jump in? Is it going to eclipse the general mainstream FAST? Where do we see the connected TV going?
I'll kick this one off. I mean, I see FAST is an element of connected TV. In our, from our perspective, connected TV, by its purest definition, is a television device that is connected to the internet either through its own native capabilities or because of something plugged into it, right? And FAST is something that sits within that realm. And that's why connected TV is sort of separated from from the OTT side, which is just everything that's over the top, no matter the screen. So I guess, looking at it through that lens, the way that I would address the question is that, well, connected TV is here to stay. FAST is here to stay. And I think what we'll soon see going away is the siloing of content at all. I think that there's going to be an emergence or a sucking out of channels and on-demand apps, etc., a surfacing of all of that content simply to try and provide better experiences for the consumer. One of the mistakes, I think, well, we live in a capitalist society governed by Wall Street, to the point you just made earlier. But I think one of the most heinous mistakes that's being made, and it's an inevitable one, so no one's to blame, right, is that the future, the new generation of television, right, has a sort of pecking order of priorities. One, money; two, experience; three, longevity. And that's a big mistake, right? Like, money shouldn't be number one. The experience should be number one, because from that the money will follow. But what I do see happening, and I really want to congratulate the likes of Vizio for doing this, and I am so interested by that. The Vizio Walmart thing, got my own thoughts and sort of reasons why I think that happened. They were the hardest and fastest to emerge from a short generation where all of these TVs were connected, but none of them cared about the experience. Like, they were just too busy fighting about who has the best glass, with inferior chipsets and really crappy user experiences, which is why Roku came along and gave people a $20 stick. And that's why Apple built the Apple TV and Amazon built the Fire Stick, because all of the OEMs were absolutely undeniably sleeping at the wheel. But that has taken a really sharp U-turn. And I think they're doing a good enough job at it. And also, talking to the folks at LG, they are talking about a generation of almost bi-directional entertainment through the TV, which will be forced to be native to the OEM itself. And I think that's going to take us beyond the TV that we know today, which is TV beyond traditional TV. So yeah, all of that is here to stay. But nothing's going to sit still.
All right.
They live in harmony, right? Fast and connected TVs,
Yeah.
But the connected TV or the smart TV, they play an important role. And they're also, the way I look at it is they're the incumbent. I take it back to the consumer. You go and you buy a TV set, you bring it in, and it's up to you have their attention. The connected TV has the attention of that end user. You can only lose their attention to all the other fast channels. So I see more and more of connected TVs really embracing being part of the fast ecosystem and having their own experience, not just through programming, but also through technology and maybe even offline experiences.
Well, they're the piece of plastic, whether it's the TV or a stick, the thing that is truly the thing delivering the content. They are the gatekeeper. They are the decision makers.
Absolutely.
For the whole of the rest of the food chain. And that's another reason why I think the OEMs, and I'm going to say instead of the connected TVs, the OEMs and folks have realized that they need to play catch up, and they're doing a good job at it.
Yeah, the OEMs are really interesting. I mean, it's kind of funny how, I mean, I kind of think of these things always in historical terms. I mean, Gillette's safety razor. I mean, it's really, give away the razor and sell the blades forever. I mean, that's what's going on with Samsung and Vizio, and it's a smart thing.
Are we going to see other TV manufacturers jump in more? Because right now it seems, I mean, and I could be wrong, it just seems that Samsung, LG, and Vizio are making the most noise on the connected TV front.
You're right, but they're all doing different things. TCL, LG, Hisense, they're all in some way playing in the space. There are some on the sidelines, which I kind of scratch my head at, and one being Sony, another being Panasonic.
And interestingly, Sony being actually the first brand ever to release an internet-connected TV back in 2012. It feels like a bit of a BlackBerry event, doesn't it?
Doesn't it?
Yeah, a little. Sorry, Nick. Sorry, Sony.
Oh, was that 12 years ago already?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was. I was talking to Nick Colson. He's one of the grandfathers of connecting TVs to the internet, and I think he said it was like maybe even earlier. That we actually did a huge piece of research. I advise anyone. This is my plug. Go to the Origin page site. Go to our blog and do a search at the bottom for the history of connected TV, and you'll actually find the complete story from day zero up to today. It's actually quite. It's an extraordinary journey.
I remember, I think it had to be like 2005 or 2006, and we were talking about, would streaming take off? And I was talking to the president, who shall remain nameless, of one of the home studios' home video divisions. And he said, streaming will never take off. He goes, what am I going to do? String a cable from my TV to my computer? And that was only 20 years ago that people had that kind of a mindset.
Well, I mean, I'm curious what the Walmart buying Vizio does for the industry, whether that incentivizes some of these other sort of next tier manufacturers to go bigger to hope that they get bought out, or whether it disincentivizes by saying, look, now you've got Samsung, LG, and Vizio lifted up by the power of Walmart's money and saying this is too hard of an industry for us to break into, and it becomes even more consolidation, because it could go either way at this point, right? And like, you know, Steve and Fred and everyone said, go to CES and walk around the TV section. There's dozens and dozens of brands that you don't see in people's living rooms, but they make phenomenal looking screens, and whether they're for commercial purposes or they're just sold in European and Asian markets, but the technology is rapidly advancing. And, you know, when I got my first LG OLED, I was like, oh, there's nothing that's going to be better than this. Now you look at some of the nano LED stuff that's there, and you're just like, this is unbelievable. Where the heck is this going to go? And the connected part of getting the content onto it is just a sort of, you know, by default, you have to have some way to do that, or else someone's like, everyone said, buying a $20 Roku stick or a Fire Stick just to get the content on there. So,
well, we are running out of time, so let us do the a lightning rod, where everybody spends about 30 seconds talking about a news story in the past week or so that really resonated with you in our business and why. Let's start with Yolanda.
Well, of course, I have to pick one of our press releases. So we unveiled Ava. She's an
Where did you read about
AI-powered.
it? Where did you read about it?
Well, we have it on our wire. We heard it on Media Play News.
Very good. Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Of course. So it's an AI-powered content discovery solution. Again, going back to the experience, everyone's going to need to compete beyond just the content. We, focus on fandoms, so built-in fan bases, but we also want to make the experience much less frustrating with discoverability. So check out, the beta's out there for people to check out how you can discover movies and series. And it brings up recommendations off platform, because we want people to discover the content and enjoy it and come back and use the tool.
Very cool. Bryan.
Sticking with the media play news, we just looking at the Tubi numbers that were reported recently, it's just fascinating to me. And, I think all of us probably have content on Tubi to some extent. We have a lot of content on Tubi through Multicom. It's been a great platform for us. I think it's one of the best decisions Fox has made post selling the studio as buying Tubi. It's been phenomenally successful for them. So yeah, it's been fascinating to see their growth. I'm curious to see how their content evolution is going to follow, because they've been the sort of what Amazon Prime used to be, which is like, we'll take almost everything and just see what works. And if they get to a point of saturation, we'll see how that affects some of the content providers. But it's a fascinating story just to watch their growth.
Okay, Fred.
I can't think of anything more interesting than that I've read than some of the things that we've been talking about today. I think the point that the thing I flagged earlier about sort of the implications of this Paramount debacle, I think has had all of my attention. So I don't think there's anything I can really throw in that is interesting from the content side. I was pleased and interested to see a certain agency winning a really good brand as AOR. Like, there's still some of these seasonal shifts and changes in loyalty between brands and agencies. So that was interesting to see, sort of slightly out of season. But otherwise, I'd say on this chat, we've covered off the things that have had my attention.
Okay. And last but not least, Steve.
Kind of a self-serving statement, in all honesty, but I read it in the trades today, where the traditional MVPDs continue to lose, obviously, viewership, but specifically Latino viewership. And I look at what we're trying to accomplish with Electric Now and Espanol, and in traditional world, certainly a variety of audience, be it Latino or otherwise, have been underserved. And yet I look at where they're going to from what I've seen here when I talk to the various platforms. Some of them have said to me, we don't have a strategy regarding certain groups, be it Latino or otherwise. We're still trying to figure it out. So here we are, in one sense, an opportunity to micro-focus on individual groups, and yet there's still massive gaps, such as the Latino area.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody who participated today. And I think we had a very great buzz today. And now let's get our coffee and get another buzz on. Eric and OTT.X, thank you very much for having us. And panelists, you guys were wonderful. Thank you
Thanks
very
a
much.
lot, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah,
You too.
Thank you for having me. Thanks for having us,
it's tough
guys.
to stop. And thankfully, we don't have to, actually. In a couple of weeks, we're going to be talking about all this same stuff at the X Fronts in Los Angeles. That's May 21st and 22nd. So hope you'll all be there. And for our audience as well, tell your friends. It's catching on, the Buzz and the X Fronts. So again, thanks to TK, Bryan, Fred, Steve, and Yolanda for taking us on that deep dive into the alluring and yet murky, harrowing waters of streaming today. We'll be back again with our next edition of The Buzz on June 12th. You can register to attend this and future episodes from our website at OTT.X.org and find our podcasts on Spotify. Hope you join us and invite your friends and colleagues as well to get in on The Buzz. We're proud at OTT.X to offer this session free to the OTT industry on behalf of the OTT.X membership. If you're not yet a member and want to I want to invite you to head out to the website and look into becoming one. That's OTT.X.org. We have a broad range of membership tiers for a organization of just about any size. So we'd love to have you on board and be part of our community. That's what we have today. Thanks, everybody. Until next time, have a great week, couple of weeks, and we'll see you later on in Los Angeles. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having us.
Take care.
Take care.